Ladies and gentlemen, members, welcome to this month's meeting of the Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Mark Evans and I will be chairing the meeting. Before we start, just to remind you that this meeting is being recorded and to remind you that anything you say will be immediately available in the public domain. And your presence here, you consent to that process. Item number 1 is the minutes of the last meeting. Oh, sorry, introductions. My name is Councillor Mark Evans. To my right is
Good evening, members of the public. My name's Annette Roberts and I'm the Corporate Director, Place and Communities. Thank you.
Hardeep Sharma, the Planning Solicitor.
Helen Benbow, Development Management Team Manager.
Kelly Harris, Lead Planning Manager.
Tom Nutt, Assistant Team Manager, Management.
Rebecca Potter, I'm one of the planning officers.
okay. Thank you for that. So item 1 is the minutes of the last meeting. If you were present at the last meeting, you've read the minutes and you deem them a true and correct record of what took place, please signify. Any members to the contrary? Thank you, members. Those minutes have been approved. Item 2, apologies.
Chairman, I've received apologies from councillors Chapman, Cope, Davis, Harper-Wallis, Holmes and Reid.
Thank you very much. Item 3, declarations of interest. Members, any declarations of interest? No, that's fine. Thank you very much. So we move on to item 4, which is the determination of planning applications, and we have 3 this evening. And I'll just address the members of the public and just to say thank you for your interest in the applications this evening. But just to ask you if we can conduct the meeting in complete silence. I have to show that the meeting is conducted in sanitised conditions, really. You will hear things that you disagree with. Please don't boo. And you will hear things that you agree with. Please don't cheer. The first application is application number 2300576 FULM. The Chillington Estate, Chillington Park, Chillington. Presenting the case is Tom. You're going to present the application. Okay, then, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Planning permission is sought for a ground-mounted solar voltaic development of up to 49.9 megawatts, a battery energy storage system and associated infrastructure access and works. The application site relates to 65 hectares of arable land located within the Chillington Estate, immediately to the north of the M54 and 1 mile north of Codsall village. The site is made up of fields bounded by trees and hedgerows, with the site boundary formed by existing roads to the north, Gunstone Lane, south M54, and to the east, Port Lane. To the west are further agricultural fields, woodland, and beyond that, the open parkland area of the Chillington Estate. A road, which is also a public right-of-way, runs through the centre of the site, north to south, and forms the access to Gunstone Cottages, a pair of semi-detached cottages. Existing high voltage overhead power lines and associated pylons run southwest to northeast through the site. As you can see on the slides, go to the next slide. Just got some photos that just show what I've set out. So photo on the left there, as you can see, that's the Gunstone Lane that takes you down through the site to Gunstone Cottages. And on the right there is a view just sort of across the site, really, with woodland in the background. We go to the next slides. Again, these are the views across the site where the solar array would be positioned on the left-hand side. You can see the woodland at the top there, and the area in front of that wouldn't have solar arrays because that's a more elevated position and is high quality agricultural land. We go to the next slide, and as you can see there's Gunstone Cottages that are within the centre of the site, and also a view across the fields in question. Should we go to the next slide? This is at the top of the site to the north, from Lane onto Gunstone Lane there. That would be the operational access to the site once it had been constructed, temporary access. would be to the east during construction. And the photo on the left there is right at the top of the site, looking through some gates down to the southern area of the site. During the course of that application, some of the solar array was located just beyond that gate, but following amendments and discussions with Conservation Officer and English Heritage, that was removed from the scheme, and fencing and hedgerows and landscaping proposed to lessen the visual impact. Go to the next slide. And photos across just the main part of the site, which is the agricultural land. That's it, photos. So you've got the layout there. I'll just take you through the proposal and the site, the overall assessment of proposals. But as you can see there, you see actually that gives you the context of the wider area in South Staffordshire. And you've got the solar layout there. You can see the white kind of line sort of from the south going to the northeast, which is the existing line of pylons, which the solar array avoids. And right in the southeast corner, close to the motorway, you've got the proposed battery energy storage system. And you can see from north to south within the centre of the site, that is Gunstone Lane. And the red, sort of little red triangle in the centre of the site is where Gunstone Cottages lie. So I'll just take you through the proposal. So it would comprise panels mounted on frames and pile driven into the ground with no concrete or fixing required. The panels would be laid out in rows with gaps in between of 2 to 6 metres. The proposed battery energy storage system and substation would be located in the southeast corner of the site. The site as a whole would be enclosed by deer fencing measuring 2.5 metres in height. And the development would include reinforced hedgerow planting along Gunstone Lane and around the perimeter of the site as a whole. Tree planting, wildflower meadows and species-rich grassland. It would also include mitigation for the loss of 1 skylark territory, with the provision of 2 skylark plots on arable land outside the boundary of the site. As I said, the operational route would be via Gunstone Lane. It would be operated remotely and visited approximately 2 times per month by someone in a van or a car. Generating station, so the battery energy system in the southeast corner of the site would be connected to the Bushbury station substation via an underground cabling, and the application states that the grid offer has been secured by the applicant. In terms of the planning assessment, the site is within the Greenbelt. The solar farm and BESS proposals are not one of the specific types of development listed in the core strategy or the NPPF as being acceptable within the Greenbelt. As such, the proposed development comprises inappropriate development. It causes harm to the openness of the Greenbelt due to its encroachment into the countryside. Therefore, it is subject to the requirements of paragraph 152, which states that inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the Greenbelt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. These circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the Greenbelt by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm resulting from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations. In this case, the other considerations put forward are that the proposed solar array and battery energy storage would make a significant contribution to renewable energy development and also to store energy within the batteries to provide flexible backup power to the grid at short notice. This is supported by the National Policy Statement for Energy. The national policy states that the solar is classed as a critical national priority infrastructure with the need case outweighing residual effects in all but the most exceptional cases. In line with the NPPF, local planning authorities should approve applications for renewables if their impacts can be made acceptable. With regard to impacts, on landscape, a scheme is proposed to fill gaps in existing hedgerows to reduce visual impact. Medium to longer range views will be largely screened. The council's external landscape consultant consider that the proposed mitigation is well designed and should reduce visual effects from surrounding receptors. And this would be in keeping with the landscape character of the application site and wider area. The application site is within the Chillington estate, which includes Chillington Hall, a Grade 2 star registered park and garden, and a conservation area which surrounds Chillington Hall. Grade 1 listed building. The Council's Conservation Officer and Historic England have been consulted during the course of the application, and both have visited the site to assess the impacts on heritage. Following amendments to the layout to reduce the visibility of solar panels from the roads that approach Chillington Hall, they consider that the proposals would cause a lower level of less than substantial harm to the setting of both the conservation area and registered park. Other factors taken into consideration with regards to heritage include securing continuity of ownership, as the hall has been in the same family ownership since the 1180s. It is possible that the income generated for the scheme the estate will allow essential maintenance to be carried out on the significant Grade 1 listed hall and associated buildings, and also maintenance of the registered park. It is noted that the solar farm is not a permanent feature within the landscape and can be removed at the end of its lifespan, returning the fields to its current state. In terms of loss of agricultural land, the best and most versatile agricultural land needs to be taken into consideration. However, it is considered that it should be afforded limited weight here, given that the majority of the site is not BMV and the temporary nature of the proposal. There are also conditions that would be secured to protect soil quality that would ensure no longer term harm is caused. With regard to residential amenity, there are no objections from residents or from environmental health, subject to conditions to conform to the agreed noise levels. Conditions also include controlled hours of operation, lighting levels, and control of dust during construction. Planting is recommended to achieve suitable mitigation of glint and glare impacts by obstructing views at ground floor level, and this is included as a condition. The Highways Authority have been consulted and raised no objections, subject to a number of compliance conditions for highway safety reasons, and that a conditional survey is undertaken before start of works and once works are completed. The Lead Local Flood Authority do not object, subject to compliance conditions, ensuring the submitted drainage strategy is adhered to. Council's ecologist is satisfied that the application is unlikely to result in significant effects to protected species. Mitigation for the loss of one skylock territory is proposed, as mentioned previously. This would be secured by a Section 106 and delivered prior to commencement. The submitted biodiversity net gain report and metrics show that habitat development of the site would result in an area-based gain of 159% and hedgerow net gain of 22.75%. This includes an 8-metre loss of hedgerow to facilitate access. The Council's senior ecologist welcomes the significant BNG achieved on the site due to habitat enhancements, noting that the gains are far in excess of the mandatory 10% uplift. The Council's Arboricultural Officer has been consulted, and following a rerouting of the access track to avoid root protection areas of mature trees, is satisfied with the proposals in relation to trees. In terms of fire safety, the applicant has submitted information which relates to surface water drainage arrangements in the event of fire. This involves a valve to prevent any flows from exiting downstream. It would allow contaminated water from firefighting to be contained, tested, treated and removed as needed without water entering open courses of the drainage system or watercourse. Staffordshire Fire and Rescue Service raised no objections, subject to conditions, to ensure that there is a detailed information to provide the Fire and Rescue Service responders to the site with technical information and the best approaches in the event of a fire. In conclusion, whilst the harm to the greenbelt is given substantial weight, it is considered that the development impacts have been made acceptable, as discussed, and in the context of national policy on energy, the proposal would make a valuable contribution to cutting greenhouse gas emissions, which is a significant factor in tipping the balance in favour of the proposal. The proposal is therefore considered to comply with the overarching aims of the development plan and the NPPF. Accordingly, approval is recommended, subject to Section 106, conditions, and for a temporary period of 40 years, after which time the equipment will be removed and the site reverted back to its agricultural use. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Members, that's the application presented by Tom. Just to remind you that the recommendation is to approve subject to conditions. So we have speaking for the application, Hani Ramirez, the agent. Madam, you've got 3 minutes and I will be quite strict on that. Oh, sorry, 5 minutes, and I will be quite strict on that.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Councillors, the application presented before you tonight is for the development of ground-mounted solar photovoltaic panels, along with a battery energy storage system and associated infrastructure. This is proposed land at Chillington Estate. A public right-of-way runs centrally along Gunston Lane between the eastern and western parcels of the site, and Gunston cottages are the sole residential properties in the immediate vicinity, which are part of the estate. These residents have been actively involved in the development of the proposal and have raised no objections. The development has also been evolving following pre-application discussions with the Council and the presentation to the Parish Council. The site has been selected following careful consideration of a range of factors, including proximity to a viable grid connection, topography, flood risk, heritage, adequate distances from residential neighbours, and land of less agricultural value. The site is proposed to connect to Bushbury substation via an underground cable, and an alternative size assessment has been provided with the application to demonstrate the justification for this site. As proposed, there will be no need for new access arrangements, as the site will be accessed via Port Lane to the east for construction and Gunston Lane to the north for operation. More than 85% of the site is outside the best and more versatile land, and the proposal does not involve the irreversible loss of any land available for agriculture, either temporarily or permanently, as the solar and BESS will be wholly reversible and will be decommissioned after 40 years. A landscape and visual impact assessment has been submitted with the application and concludes that, although the proposal will cause some localized change to views, in particular from the public right-of-way, the proposed landscaping will be able to fully mitigate any changes in visual amenity due to its low height, boundary treatment, vegetation, and topography. Heritage matters have been addressed through the removal of panels to the north of the site, closer to the registered parks and garden, and additional landscaping. The assessment from your conservation officer, following no objection from Historic England, has concluded that the significant benefits of the proposal outweigh the minimal harm to Chillington Hall and the registered park and gardens. A 15-metre buffer from ancient woodland is proposed to ensure preservation of this valuable habitat, and the proposal will result in more than 159% biodiversity net gain. Surface water will be managed through a swales and attenuation pond, details of which have been discussed and agreed with your relevant technical experts. Fire protection has been incorporated into the design, which has been updated following discussions with the Fire and Rescue Service, and an outlined battery safety management plan has been submitted with the application. No objection is raised from your Fire and Rescue Service. We have proactively worked together to address areas of concerns through both online and in-person public consultation events and discussions with the Council, reaching the necessary agreement to lead to this recommendation for approval from your officers. As you know, South Staffordshire announced a climate change emergency in 2019, with the Council looking to mitigate the impacts of climate change in the local area. This is in line with the UK's net zero target by 2050 and the renewed commitment to transition to more sustainable forms of energy. The proposed development's contribution to the urgent national need for renewable energy is afforded substantial weight. Should this proposal be approved, the income generated will ensure the proper upkeep of Chillington Hall and its related heritage assets, as well as the increase of staff's wages at the estate for the benefit of the local economy. The estate has been in the same family for over 800 years, which is rare nowadays, and this project ensures the family's continued operation of the estate. The historic preservation of this asset is also a significant public benefit. Overall, the renewable energy contribution, which will assist in meeting the challenges of climate change, minimal landscape and ecological impact, benefits to heritage assets and substantial P&G, clearly and significantly outweigh any harm to the Greenbelt. Therefore, very special circumstances do exist to allow this development in line with the relevant policies of your local plan. Hence, we kindly request this application be approved as recommended by your officers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam. And thank you for keeping within the 5 minutes. There are no speakers against the application, but we do have a ward member. Councillor Sutton, anything you want to say at this stage?
Thank you, Chair. I've listened to the presentation and read the documentation. I've had no representation from local residents, and I look forward to the debate with interest.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. Members, it's over to you, so I'll throw it open to the floor for questions, observations, or any points of debate. Members. No questions, observations? Okay, members, we'll to Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points that I've written down to clarify. There are public rights of way. Will any of those be blocked up? Because there are two that are indicated, which is 62 and number 80 on there. And if there are going to be 2.5 metre fences put round, they'd be blocking public rights of way and bridle paths.
You okay to answer that, Tom?
I can confirm that no public rights of way will be blocked.
Councillor Kelly, anything else? Thank you. Councillor Perry.
Just a question. You talk about landscaping, etc., around the certain parts of it. Who actually will monitor that they actually do as they say when it comes to the landscaping, please?
Okay, Tom.
Yeah, we do have a obviously conditions attached relating to landscaping. Includes a long-term management plan to be agreed by the authority, and of course with any conditions, if we're alerted to any breaches of conditions, we're aware, obviously, as we travel around the district and see these sites regularly, we would obviously pursue that if that was the case, if there was any breach.
Okay, Councillor Perry, you okay with that? Councillor Steele, you were indicating a desire to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. The first point is, I notice this is a full application, and yet there's a rather large quite a number of pages dealing with battery safety, which are only an OBSMP, which is an outline battery safety management plan. Why at this stage we're being asked to grant full planning permission? Why is something only still at outline? Why aren't they going for outline planning permission? That's the first question. Thank you.
Okay, Tom, are you taking that one?
Yeah, during the application phase, so I suppose maybe the name could be changed for it, but yeah, outline battery management plan includes the details of proposing what would happen in the event of a fire, and that's kind of to be agreed during the course of the application with the fire service and obviously ourselves. But there are details that can be left to condition. So some of the technical details that aren't reliant on being assessed during the course of the application. So the reason it just says outline is because it doesn't include some of those technical details of the batteries that can be agreed, and the fire service are happy for that to be agreed post decision with them, as long as it's agreed and it's kept in sort of agreement between them, and a record is kept, a tactical information record, which is included in the proposed conditions. Then yes, the fire service are satisfied with that. And it's similar with other aspects as well, with things like drainage. Quite often we have an outlined drainage strategy, and the flood authority are happy for some details to be left to conditions.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Steele.
So we're being asked to approve something that we don't know what it's going to be, basically. I mean, you could really cut and paste most of what I said at the last planning committee that we had, which didn't get any support. So at 4.14 in the fire risk management in the officer's report, it states the application includes a battery energy storage system at the southeast corner of the site, an outline battery safety management plan, and technical data sheets have been submitted. It includes the following information, and it mentions some what I would call standards, and the two standards mentioned are, I'm just finding them, sorry, apologise, it's all letters and numbers. Yeah. All cells and packs to be installed at the proposed battery storage site will have passed the UL 9540A evaluations for thermal runaway and fire propagation. Now that's not a British standard, that's an American standard. It may well be adopted worldwide, but it's not a British standard. And also, next one, the separation distance between the battery containers and site boundary shall be in accordance NFPA 855 in brackets 2023. Again, that's an American National Fire Prevention Association, something. It's not British standards, it's American standards. Personally, I have issues with that. This country's got a fantastic reputation for, in the main, I'm very careful what I say, safety issues, given that we've just gone through rather a nasty situation in London. I'll not mention that. But in Maine, we have tremendous safety levels in this country, and yet we appear to be accepting American tests and American standards. I did have quite a lot more to say. So, having got rid of my first question about outline battery suppression support, within the planning application, which we haven't got obviously on screen tonight, at 4.1 within the planning application, the OBSMP, that's the Outline Battery Safety Management Plan, supports the planning application submitted to South Staffs Council, the reference 23/00576. The local fire and rescue service is a consultation body in consideration of the planning application. You mentioned that they've got no objections, but unfortunately they're not a statutory consultee anyway. So even if they did have objections, it wouldn't actually carry that much weight with this authority, in this planning committee, would it? As they're not statutory. So again, I do have concerns with that. It is imperative that all new battery installations meet the highest safety standards. This is an ongoing process. The current relevant guidance on battery safety is set out in the previous section applied to this OBSMP. Then further, at 4.33, and this BESS will be designed in accordance with the UK and internationally recognised good practice guidance available at the time. Prior to energisation, the applicant shall provide the final system design and construction information as detailed within the National Fire Chiefs Council's guide. So once that won't come back to us. So who will give the okay for that installation, whatever it might be? I mean, as you say, by the time this gets off the ground, 3 or 4 years' time, I'm concerned about who is going to check the safety of the batteries. Going to, if it's not this committee, we'll have given this permission 3 or 4 years before it happens, and yet hopefully nothing unsafe will be used. But it just seems odd that we have to pass something now and agree to it that we don't know what it will be. I think the country's leaving itself in a terrible situation. But I said all this last month anyway, so I shan't repeat it. That's all I've got to say, really.
Okay, Cecilia, I think it's important to reiterate that the fire and rescue have made no objections on the application that's before us this evening, and that's what we're here to consider. Your observations and comments seem to be on national policy and interpretation thereof, but on the application that's here today, The fire and rescue have made no objections, but I will pass it on for comments to Tom. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, Fire and Rescue Service aren't statutory consultee, but they are most relevant consultee in terms of this issue. So obviously we do give that considerable weight, as we've seen in this committee meetings related to battery energy storage systems. So their response and their involvement during the course of the application and in terms of the conditions is essential, really, and that's set out in the planning practice guidance as well. The fire chief's guidance does include a number of sort of case studies and standards from other countries, and I think that reflects that this type of proposal is relatively new, and they've done significant research and kind of taken considered those standards and decided on which ones they think are the best in terms of guidance, and that's what we have. That's what we have to go with. So I don't have an issue with those standards at the moment, because that is the best available, and that's what's used, and that's what's stated in planning practice guidance. So in terms of that, I don't think there's anything else. On the conditions, obviously that's why conditions exist, is because not all things have to be agreed through the course of the application. Details can be agreed by condition, and some technical details can be left condition and can be agreed that way. And the fire service, obviously, they're the relevant consultee, and they're confident and happy and have agreed that during the course of the application. They have a checklist that the applicant fills in, and then they have a discussion and via myself. So I'm comfortable in terms of the application, in terms of fire safety being covered and the conditions being acceptable to the fire service. So I think we've gone as far as we can in terms of the planning process. Whether in future further standards come out outside of planning legislation with regards to this type of facility, that may happen, and obviously that will happen outside of planning. But at the moment, we're taking into account all of the NPPF planning practice guidance and conforming to that and the relevant guidance at the moment.
Councillor Steele.
Yes, I'll have to accept that, unfortunately, I think. There are concerns about the distance between the battery storage system as well. The figures, the test standards quoted are not the NFCC ones, which is the National Fire Chiefs consultation. They're still in consultation between minimum distances. I do feel I'm banging my head against the brick wall, so I'll shut up now. You'll all be pleased to know.
No, the points you raise are valid. It's just that on the application before us this evening, we've got no alternative but to go along with the recommendations from the fire and rescue, and they've raised no objections. How they've reached those that decision is for a debate outside this planning committee. So, Councillor Kelly.
Can I ask you to go to page 20, Tom, please? My concern on this is the extra 30 HGVs and 60 vehicles per car movement. Is there anything in the conditions stating which direction they will route? Because further on down in that paragraph, it does say construction route will be from the A41. However, Staffordshire County Council Highways have no authority because it's part of Wolverhampton City Council. Can we put in the conditions that they don't come through villages? Sorry. It's page 20 on our agenda. Because 30 HGVs per day These 4,200 extra vehicles on that country lane is a lot. Is in the conditions because of 38 extra HGVs a day and extra 60 vehicles, that is conditions put in that they can only do specific routes to and from the site. So it's going through very small villages and you've got 38 tonne and 40 tonners.
Yes. So there's a construction traffic management plan that's been submitted, and highways that's the relevant document that they review in assessing the application, and they're satisfied with the routing. As you're aware, there was initial objections from Wolverhampton, but due to further sort of technical information being provided by the applicants and a reconsultation with Wolverhampton City Council, they withdrew their objection because it didn't affect the four-way junction in the way that they thought it would. So they're satisfied with that. But in terms of the routing, highways are comfortable with it, and there are also conditions to restrict the number of movements and the timings of movements each day as well, to avoid peak sort of traffic times. Thanks.
Councillor Kelly, okay with that? Members, any other comments, observations? Members, Councillor Steele.
Apologies, Mr. Chairman. In my annoyance, I forgot to raise the last thing I've got on my phone. And it's to do with access to the site, fire service access at 4.5. In the previous and other applications of similar BESSes, it's been stated by the National Fire Chiefs consultation that ideally there should be 2 separate site accesses, and I couldn't find that anywhere in the documentation. So as we've got the plan up there, could you just help me out and tell me where the 2 separate accesses might be?
Tom, you okay with
in
that?
the event of a horrific fire.
Okay.
Thank you. So yeah, the operational access would be at the north top of Gunstone Lane. So there would be one access to the wider site, but once sort of the fire service would enter the site there, which is a significant distance from the battery energy site you can see in the southeast, there are sort of numerous routes around and through the solar array. There are quite large gaps in between them, so there are some numerous accesses to the site and water available as well. And the fire service is one of their key sort of requirements. Really, the fire service is that practically they need to be able to access the site to deal with the fire. So they've reviewed that and they're comfortable in terms of getting their fire engine close enough to the site and at various points to be able to tackle a fire in the event of a fire, and that relates mainly to the best site, because that's the area that would obviously, if it set fire, that would be the biggest risk in terms of fire.
Yes, Steele.
So just to clarify, you're saying that there's only one main entrance to access the site? Because that's not what the NFCC would prefer. They want to, because of the prevailing wind, perhaps to be blowing the gas cloud or whatever. I'm not concerned about the safety of the solar arrays. They're not likely to explode. In the event of a lightning strike on the best facility, they need to get there and have an alternative way of getting there in opposition to the prevailing wind.
Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, in terms of the NFCC guidance, I mean, a site for them would be the batteries themselves. It would be the site for them. A planning site or a planning red line boundary is probably not on their radar. So the entrance, or let's see, to the planning site, the entrance is at the top. In terms of NFCC guidance, they would be referring to the actual battery unit themselves, which is a significant distance to the southeast of the site. So in that regard, there are quite a few different accesses to the site, which in terms of fire safety and in terms of the NFCC guidance would be the actual batteries themselves.
So is the one there just up from Port Lane? Is that what you're saying? I think it's Port Lane, isn't it? Just past, you get the road crosses the motorway. It's a couple of 100 metres. Is there an access immediately there to the left?
So the access, yeah, it's from Port Lane to the north, and obviously there's Gunstone Lane. So it goes from Port Lane down Gunstone Lane all the way south, right to the bottom of the map there. And then there's access across as well through the solar panels. Obviously, there's the main road on the east as well to the battery site, which is close there. So that's also another access point close to the battery storage system. So yeah, the fire service were comfortable with being able to access it to tackle the fire. Thank you.
Members, I now move to vote. If you wish to approve that application, please signify. That's to approve the application, members. To refuse the application, and any abstentions? You certainly can, Councillor Steele. Okay, thank you, members. That application has been approved, and we'll move on to the next one, which is application 2400296/FUL. And this is the Bungalow Farm, Ivy House Lane, Brood, Stafford, ST199LW. And ask the officer to present that yourself, Helen. So Helen will present the application.
Thank you, Chair. The application relates to a former poultry farm, which consists of 9 agricultural barns located on the eastern side of Ivy House Lane in Brood. The site is situated in a rural area characterised by open fields, with the bungalow sited to the west fronting the highway and within the same ownership of the applicant. There are 2 immediate neighbouring dwellings, one to the north and one to the south. I'll just give you a site layout here. We've got residential properties to the north, to the south, and this one centrally is under the same ownership. The application proposes the conversion of 3 of the existing barns into 5 dwellings. Many of the existing barns currently located upon the site are to be demolished to facilitate the development. This plan gives you a clearer indication of what is to be removed. So everything you can see here shaded in blue, I've got to go back, will be demolished as part of the proposals in order to facilitate the development. What you can see remaining outlined in white would remain and form part of the conversion. So this is what we're calling the northern barn, the southern barn, and the eastern barn. So the northern barn will have its central section demolished, so you can see that blue area here, and split into 2 dwellings. The eastern barn will be subdivided internally to create a further 2 dwellings, and the southern barn will be retained as a single dwelling. As part of this conversion, the ridge height to the southern barn will be increased by 0.35 metres, and the linking section between the 2-storey and the single-storey element will be replaced by a 2-storey link. This application follows a previous approval on the application site in November 2023, which was a prior approval granting consent for the conversion of 3 barns into 5 dwellings. However, this consent related to a different configuration of development than that what is currently proposed, albeit the same number of dwellings. This also provided a tight residential curtilage around the proposed barn conversions, which is what is required by the legislation. So this current application seeks to include additional development, which is a new access drive serving the plots, landscaping and private rear gardens. take you through some photos of the site. So the barns I'm going to show you now are to be retained and converted. So this is the northern barn here, and this will be converted into 2 plots. This central section will be demolished, as will this barn to the rear here. So this is what we're calling the eastern barn, and this will be internally subdivided and will be made into 2 plots. And this is a view of the southern barn that will be converted into what will be called plot 5. So the principle of converting the barns into residential use for 5 dwellings is already established through previous approvals and does comply with Greenbelt policy. However, it is the new garden areas that represent inappropriate development. The addition of garden areas would, however, allow for the occupiers of the dwellings to have a reasonable level of private amenity space, and it's considered to have a limited impact on the openness and the function of the Greenbelt. This is subject, of course, to conditions removing any permitted development rights. So taking these factors into account, it is considered that very special circumstances exist which clearly outweigh the harm. The proposal will not impact on amenity of neighbours, and the properties will have no implications on highway safety or ecological matters. Approval is therefore recommended. And the final slide just demonstrates the final layout that is proposed here. So the conversion of this barn into 2, subdivision here into 2, and this single barn converted into 1 unit here. The proposed gardens are shown to the rear and side of the properties, and it's this element that is the inappropriate development in the Greenbelt that we think is considered outweighed in terms of harm by the very special circumstances. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. Members, that's the application presented by Helen. And just to remind you, the recommendation is to approve. Now, we do have a speaker, Mr. Mark Wood, who is speaking against the application. Mr. Wood. It's you that's got 3 minutes, and we will be quite strict.
Thank you. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to elaborate on my objection. To begin with, I'd like to acknowledge that the changes made on the 22nd of August amended some of the concerns I had regarding overlooking windows on the south side of what is plot 5. Sorry, I should add that I live on the bottom dwelling to the south of the farm. Additionally, the roof lights don't seem to afford a view of my property, so I feel comfortable with those changes. I am, however, slightly concerned about an upper storey window on a hallway, although it may be that you can't actually get a clear view of my property. It's hard to tell from the plans, though. And finally, I did have a concern about the boundary as originally drawn, but that has also been amended. Despite those changes, though, I'm still very concerned about one other point I raised in my objection, which was in relation to the proximity of the dwelling in plot 5, which following the changes to the original pre-approval that was mentioned has moved so it's directly bordering my property. And I'm concerned about the impact that that would have on my privacy compared to the original plan. So the previously pre-approved plans were therefore, by contrast, much more welcome. And we're a more reasonable distance from the border of my property. As such, I'm quite distressed by the subsequent change in the location compared to the pre-approval, which I notice has since been added as a fallback option to this planning application. Therefore, the difference between the locations of the 2 proposals may not seem that much when viewed on the plans themselves, but I feel the proximity of the current proposed location of the plot 5 dwelling would have an immensely greater impact on my current levels of privacy than the fallback option would. It's therefore my hope that the dwelling locations in the fallback option would be preferable to the current proposal for plot 5. Thank you again for letting me speak.
Thank you, Mr Wood. Ward member Councillor Sutton, is there any observations you want to make at this stage?
Yeah, I'm interested in what Mr Wood has to say, and I've seen the amendments to the changes that have been submitted. Obviously, he suggested that there's some concern about privacy in relation to neighbouring properties. Could you just clarify that for me, please, Helen?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, through you, Chair. Just to assist with Mr Wood's commentary, this plan is probably helpful. So the plot 5, as we're referring to, is this one here. I don't know if you can see my cursor there. And then Mr Wood's property is this one here to the southwest of the property. So it's absolutely correct. The property that was approved previously sat just in front of this. In fact, I can show it you. It was this one here that's outlined in white. I hope you can see that. So that was the one that was subject to the previous conversion. It is now this one. So it is slightly closer than what the previous approval was. However, what this plan is demonstrating is what the outlook and the intervisibility between the proposed converted barn and Mr Wood's property. And we got this plan specifically drafted to make sure that we could add that comfort, to make sure there wasn't going to be any matters arising. Based on this and the assessment, we are comfortable that whilst it will be a change of environment for Mr Wood, it won't result in any unnecessary, undue overlooking or loss of privacy. And that's been very much a matter for the case officer to deal with, and we're in a comfortable position with that now. Things like hallways, which were referred to, they're not habitable. So looking from those is not considered. We'd look at habitable rooms, bedrooms very much so, and that's what that's showing there. So I hope that goes some way to give you some comfort, members, in terms of decision making, and hopefully Mr Wood as well, that we did look into that and we're comfortable that whilst it will represent a change of outlook, there will be no undue harm considered. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. Councillor Sutton.
Yeah, thank you for that clarity. From my perspective as a ward member, although not comfortable in sacrificing Greenbelt, totally understandable with the conversion of properties to give some kind of real recreational area, and I support this application, but we'll take part in the debate if there is one.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. So now throw it open to members. Councillor Duncan.
Just going on that privacy sort of angle, what type of hedges or barrier will there be to increase the privacy?
Thank you. Because it's a Greenbelt location, we wouldn't want any hard, fast boundaries in terms of blocking the views. What we tend to go with is open fencing and additional planting. But mainly privacy concerns come from first floor level rather than ground floor level, because you've obviously got that increased ability to look at a greater distance. So what we tend to do is try to orientate the buildings and the windows and internally arrange the accommodation so that that is limited. And in this case, that's what we've achieved. But in answer to your question, the fencing would be quite open because we wanted to keep that rural feel rather than it providing a privacy screen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Duncan, you okay with that? Okay, members, any questions, observations or items for debate? Members. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Just one, it says 5.64 regarding trees. Are there going to be extra trees planted to mitigate the loss of some trees?
Helen, are you in a position to fill that?
So there's a tree protection plan condition proposed in terms of what's there. So they'd make sure that any construction process wouldn't impact on those. There's obviously the conditions that relate to biodiversity net gain to demonstrate the minimum 10% uplift that's outlined in condition 8. And was there condition number 9? Yeah, landscaping management plan that is hooked into the ecological management plan. Thank you. Sorry for the delay. I'm sifting through my conditions. No problem.
Councillor Kelly, does that answer the question? Members? Okay, I'll move to vote and ask members if you are minded to approve the application, please signify. That's to approve the application. Against, that's to refuse the application. No, and abstentions, none. Okay, we got that? Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to application number 3, and that is application number 2400496 VAR. And this is premises Fisheries Farm Gardening, Fisheries Farm Gardening Centre and Building Supplies Limited, Upper Landywood Lane, Chisley, Walsall, WS67AX. Helen will present the application.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to a former commercial garden centre located on Upper Landywood Lane, Cheslin Hay. Retrospective planning permission was granted in 2023 for a temporary 3-year period to use the site as a vehicle depot and yard for sewage and drainage contracting business. The site sits on the edge of the village boundary within the Greenbelt, with residences beyond to the east and opposite side of the highway. There is also one immediate neighbour which sits to the front of the site, and there are open fields beyond. So this plan just gives you an indication of the site layout. That's the red line plan. So this is a residential property here, and then we've got residential properties opposite. These are the open fields to the rear. When planning permission was granted in 2023, it was granted subject to condition 4, which limited opening hours to weekdays 7 AM to 6 PM, Saturdays 7 AM till 1 PM. This application seeks permission to vary these operational hours to include an additional hour between 6 and 7 AM, Monday to Saturdays, as well as allowing operations of the site on Sundays and bank holidays between the hours of 6 AM and 1 PM. However, it is proposed that within these additional hours, restrictions would apply to limit the use of the site to no more than 2 vehicles, and this is for the purposes of protecting residential amenity. A number of concerns have been expressed by neighbouring properties with regards to increased noise and disturbance, in addition to ongoing concerns around odours and an ongoing breach of the planning conditions on the original permission. To address these concerns, the applications have been called into planning committee by a local ward member. It is not considered that the additional traffic caused by 2 additional vehicles entering and exiting the site during these extended hours would result in any significant adverse impacts on neighbouring amenity. The Environmental Health Officer has reviewed the file and has not raised any concerns, subject to the condition restricting the additional traffic movements. The proposal will not result in any significant harm to residential amenity, nor would result in unacceptable impact on highway safety. And given this, the application is recommended for approval. So just to give you a view of the application site. So this is the view from the highway when you look at it towards the inside of the site. And these 2 pictures here show you the yard, which is located internally, looking towards the back of the site and then back towards the neighbouring dwellings. And this shows you some of the existing buildings that remain on the site, which were used as the former garden centre. And finally, the layout of the site as it remains. Application is recommended for approval, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. Members, you've heard the application presented by Helen, and to remind you that recommendation is to approve the application. We have 3 speakers. Speaking against the application is Mr. Mick Powell. Mr. Pelser. It's the nature of the application that determines the time. This is a 3-minute application. I thought the first one was, so it's definitely 3 minutes, sir. Thanks for reminding me I made a mistake.
Right, this you've heard the outline what they're asking for. There have been a number of objections from neighbours. I'm representing the neighbours who are not here tonight. Every one of the planning conditions applied to this company have been broken. That's not for tonight. The application to operate from 6 o'clock is supposedly to this new venture they've got taking waste from Sudbury. I've contacted Sudbury Prison. They don't open their gates till 8 o'clock to let the vehicles in. The distance from Sudbury to the yard is 27 miles and takes 59 minutes. So you could still leave the yard at 7 o'clock and get to Sudbury for 8 o'clock. Now, Sudbury also tell me this operation has been going on for over 2 years. So it's not a new variation. It's not a new application. It's not to create anything new. Numerous complaints have been made re smells. Now, I note there are 2 vehicles. I went in the yard today and there were 6 vehicles in there. The goods operator's licence says alternative cleansing, who are operating from there, have only permission for 3 vehicles. I've got 6 in there today. There have been 24 complaints of out-of-hours operations, some being the 5th, 6th and 16th of September. I can find no evidence of planning enforcement entering the yard. They said they've not given any evidence of them entering the yard and checking against any of the conditions that have been broken. There's been suggestion that 1 visit has been made by planning officer, but it doesn't say what for, and there's no evidence been submitted that environmental health have ever visited the yard as well to check on the conditions. I was sitting in my garden today and the smell came in the garden again, so I walked over to the yard, went into the yard, spoke to the driver, and he said he had just emptied a smaller tanker and pumped it into a bigger tanker, and that would be stored in the yard overnight and removed in the morning, which is against all the planning conditions. The operation at Sudbury is 6 days a week at the moment, so I suggest they don't need the Sunday. They were called out last Sunday because they had weather conditions and flooding. So I submit they don't need the extra hour of the morning. It is disturbing the neighbours. Neighbours are sending in photographs. They're getting out of bed, they're being disturbed. There are 4 employees working there, and so I don't think it should be approved.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. That was 3 minutes bang on. Thank you for that well presented comments there. Thank you. Speaking for the application is Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, sir. And likewise, that'll be 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. This site has been in commercial use, formerly as a garden centre and built a supply yard, and more recently, planning permission was granted for the current activity as a vehicle depot yard in connection with the applicant's sewage and drainage contracting business. The permission was sought and granted for a temporary 3-year period to allow sufficient time for the council to promote its new local plan, which identifies this brownfield site as a residential development allocation. In truth, my clients would have preferred this committee to be considering a planning application for residential redevelopment, but unfortunately the submission of the local plan to the Secretary of State has been somewhat delayed. In the meantime, there is permission in place for the current use for at least 2 years. The objections received to this application appear to focus on the use of the site, which is not for consideration at this time. Instead, committee is only required to decide whether it is reasonable to allow operating hours to be brought forward by 1 hour from 0700 to 0600. The applicant originally proposed a 0700 hour start, but subsequently, having been awarded the contract with HMP Sudbury, it became necessary for them to start an hour earlier than originally envisaged. It is acknowledged that the applicant should have been aware of the need to vary the condition, but once this was confirmed by your enforcement officer, we were immediately instructed to submit the application. Just to be clear, in the additional hour, one or possibly two drivers would arrive in their own cars, park within the yard, and then leave in one or possibly two tankers. Condition 1 of the existing permission already restricts other activities and explicitly prohibits the transfer of effluent. It may be of interest to note that the commercial use to which the site would revert after a temporary permission expires has no restrictions on operating hours or activities within the use class E. In any event, there is no evidence to suggest that allowing an 0600 hour start as opposed to an 0700 hour start will have any material impact on the residential amenity of nearby properties. After all, there are plenty of vehicle movements within the residential areas and also along Upper Landywood Lane within this hour as people go to work. The report confirms that the Environmental Health Officer has no objection to the proposal, and the Planning Case Officer has also recommended approval, subject to condition number 5 suggested by the EHO, which limits activity within the additional hour between 0600 and 0700 to no more than 2 vehicles. In the circumstances, I urge the committee to accept the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And I now call Ward Member Councillor S. Duncan. Councillor Duncan.
Good evening, everyone. A great many of my constituents have approached me who live in very close to the proximity of Fisher's Farm. Many are elderly and can't be here this evening, but they wanted me to sort of show their support. The extended operations, although not subject to this, right. The extended applications I don't agree with, so my members don't agree with. I've had real complaints. It does affect people. There's a lot of houses around that area. 6 o'clock is different to 7 o'clock. There's other big companies in the vicinity, but they can't start till 7 o'clock. So could you tell me what the difference is, please? Because it does disturb people. As I say, there's houses over the road and there's houses behind. So could you explain why this should be passed and the other companies around can't start till 7 o'clock? Thank you.
Okay, so Duncan, thank you. Is that you finished your presentation? Okay, thank you. So I didn't want to cut you too short. No, I thought you made the point very well, Councillor Duncan. Thank you for that. We have another ward member present, Councillor R. Duncan. Is there anything you want to add for that, Councillor Duncan?
Just want to reiterate that this has been going on for such a long time with regards to related issues with regard to the smell of effluent, and at times I've had 10 or 12 people contacting me with regards to the issues. Now, starting at 6 o'clock in the morning, I feel is currently too early. We've got a lot of elderly people that live there. We've got a lot of young children who need to go to school, and with lorries that are coming out of the yard at that time in the morning, I do feel, and until I've like to hear other people's views, but I feel that is far too early, and it's totally unacceptable as it stands.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor Duncan. Members, I'll throw it open to you all to make any observations, ask any questions, debate, and I'll start the ball rolling, and I'll ask Helen. Can we just address the issue that Councillor S. Duncan raised about why these can start at 6 and other companies were saying across start at 7? If you can just address that, please.
Of course, yeah, it's a fair question. So obviously we have to look at each case on its merits, as you would expect me to say. In this case, the environmental health team have reviewed the information, and 6 AM start without any further restrictions would unlikely to be supported. The difference here and the nuance that is going to be woven into the planning conditions is that earlier hours, 6 till 7, it will only be for 2 vehicles. So it's not a open extension to the consent for the comings and goings, the access and the egress of any vehicles. It's only those 2 vehicles during that time. So not only does the condition restrict the time of operation, it restricts the number of vehicles that can enter and exit the site at that time. So whilst it is a more sensitive time in terms of it being an early start, the restriction is what tips the balance in favour of it being acceptable. And that was what the Environmental Health Officer commented on, and that's now what they think is acceptable given this location. It's also fair to say it is a temporary consent that we're working from. There's no restrictions on the use. That is a correct statement in terms of a fallback position for what's there presently, and it would revert back to. But the nuance here is that it is only 2 vehicles in that hour, and that's why it's considered on balance in this case acceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ellen. Councillor Adams.
Just seems to me from listening to the presentations and reading this, there's 2 issues here. One, that it starts at 6 o'clock, which if I was living there, I wouldn't be happy about that at all. I think it's too early, far too early for lorries to be going past. But the other is the transfer of effluent. So that obviously that shouldn't be happening, but it is. So there's 2 issues there. So how is that going to be monitored and stopped?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor Helen.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It's a separate issue that's not for consideration tonight. However, it is because we're only looking at the hours as part of this application. But there is a condition that says that trade effluent should not be moved from one vehicle to another. There is a live enforcement case that's looking at that. It's in the process of seeking evidence. But as members are aware, the level of evidence we have to have has to be substantial enough to be able to warrant any formal action. We're very much in that case. It's a difficult site to evidence, but we're going through that. So whilst it is a separate matter from what is being considered today, it is very much under consideration. Thank you. I hope that helps.
Does that answer the question, Councillor Adams? Members? Councillor Perry.
Thank you. I think it's sad that this has had to come to us tonight in a way, because monitoring should have been done on this site long ago. I know we're not discussing that tonight, it's just about the hours we're discussing. I do actually think 6 o'clock in the morning is far too early, and also Saturdays and bank holidays. We're into the dark nights, there's lighting and issues and things like that. And I do think where this is, there are a lot, as you can see from the plan up there, there's a lot of houses around there. It's an intrusion on their lives. So I do think we should revert it back to the 7 o'clock and play it by that. And I also think that whilst we're doing that, we should be monitoring the site in relation to the effluent being changed from one vehicle to another because of the smells and everything else that appear to have been mentioned tonight. So, you know, there is 2 issues. One we can do something about tonight because it's about the time factor. The other one I think we should be monitoring with the site to make sure they are in line with what they are supposed to be doing and not what they do. It doesn't appear to me as though they're doing what they should be doing. They're getting away with it, in other words. So I do think that that should be looked at. Thank you.
Councillor Perry, there's some observations there. Helen, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, it's a fair point, and there is an ongoing enforcement case, so that is very much on the agenda. I think what we've got to be careful of is we can't assume that conditions will be broken. We have to go through that evidence part of approval and demonstrate that in order to progress it, as members are aware, through the enforcement process. But that is ongoing. That's live with our enforcement team at the moment. And not only do we rely on our own monitoring, as you're aware, but evidence from the residents is also what we go on. You know, that's what builds the case, that's what we form together, and then that's what the enforcement team then take forward. That is ongoing. Paddy, did you want to?
Yes, I understand the point that you're making, but one actually has to consider the report before you. We have a situation here where there is a request for a limited extension of hours, for 2 vehicles, and indeed the concerns that you have raised regarding harm to amenity. The question to ask is will 2 vehicles and the limited extension of time cause further harm to amenity. As Helen has reiterated, that's the evidence that we've got to submit. If members are minded to refuse, 2 vehicles, do they actually harm amenity in that extended hour? So, whilst I actually understand the concerns, we've got to come back to what the planning application is actually for, and also take a careful note of what environmental health are saying, because from an evidential point of view, they are actually saying that there is no concern with this limited extension.
Okay. Councillor Perry, you want to come back?
Can I just make another point? There's nothing we can do about it, but I'm just making the point. This isn't the right place for this kind of activity. It's the wrong place altogether for this kind of activity. How they've got away with it up to yet, I don't know. When it was a garden centre, it was different. But this isn't a garden centre. This is actual effluent. And it's in the wrong place. It's too close to communities, in my opinion. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Duncan.
I know we're looking at the hours, but I need to make this point. When they are transferring effluent, probably not the right word to use, but I'm going to say illegally or against the regulations that have been set them. Why do I I'm getting 32 or whatever phone calls and texts from my residents to say that they cannot stand the smell that is being generated? It is just, and then I'm told by Mr. Powell, that he's reported loads of times when this has happened, and then he's been told when they get there, the environmental people, that there's nothing there. The smells have gone. Well, yeah, they have gone because of the period of time. But when you get that many residents contacting me to say that there's an issue, there is an issue. I'm not going to just make it up. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor Perry and Councillor Duncan. You both raised issues really that are outside this application. General observations about the operation of the business. I've got to try and pull it back now to the application, which is to extend the hours from, well, yeah, from seven. What's the right word? Extend it. We're going backwards, but take it from 0700 to 0600. That's the application before us. You have raised very eloquently issues that are not for discussion this evening. So I'll pull it back to the application, which is to extend those hours. Ellen, do you want anything to add on that? Councillor Adams, was it? Sorry, Councillor Adams.
Sudbury Prison isn't open on Sunday, but we still want to have those hours on Sunday. So why aren't they just applying for 6 days a week?
The reasoning and the rationale behind it is one thing, but we just have to assess it on its merits. But I think the speaker said they were there on a Sunday because of a flooding situation, so it might not be that that's a regular occurrence. But if we don't approve a Sunday and they have to do it once, it's still a breach. So it's trying to rectify any breach of planning control. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Sutton.
Much as I sympathise with the district councillors who have spoken about the issues in their area regarding this site, as you quite rightly say, in relation to the hours, we are being told it's 1 hour from 7 back to 6 and on a Sunday and bank holidays. Docket that we've been presented and what Mr. Williams has said really doesn't actually demonstrate the need to actually extend those hours back to 6 AM in the morning. I don't think, I mean, from what Councillor Adams has just said, Councillors Duncan, Councillor Perry, all of them have suggested that there has been some issues at this site. That's fine. That's not for this forum. But what is for this forum is, has enough evidence been presented by the applicant to extend those hours for a three-year temporary contract from 7 till 6? And I'm sorry, from what I've read, I can't, and what I've heard, I can't see it's been demonstrated. especially in relation to Sundays. I appreciate what you just said, Helen, about the fact that occasionally they have a flood at Sudbury, and therefore they might have to do this on a Sunday. It would appear if we give permission, they'll be doing it every Sunday, but I don't know. But I don't think evidence is sufficient in the docket we've been presented and the evidence we've heard this evening.
Councillor Sutton. Helen, is there any observations you want to make on that?
Through you, Chair. Obviously, the application is presented to us and we are duty bound to assess it. So the evidence is one part of the assessment. We look at that, but what we have to do is look at it on its merits and be able to robustly demonstrate that there will be harm as a result. The additional hours, when restricted to 2 vehicles going in and out, an additional 2 vehicles, that's all it is per additional hour, or additional Sunday or additional bank holiday Monday, is not considered to be the high level of harm that we would need to in order to not support the application. So yes, the evidence is one thing and the contract with the prison is part of that evidence. That's not to say it will be used every day that it's extended, but the ability is for them to do it. But we assess it as if it will be, and that's what environmental health have looked at. So under the assumption that it's used in that hour for the 2 vehicles, the harm cannot be demonstrated that it warrants refusal of the application. So I hope that gives you some context. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, then. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. On the point of just 2 vehicles, drivers are renowned for wanting to get into the yard before, so they can get clear roads to get to their destinations as soon as possible. The question is, when that opens at 6, will other yard drivers be coming in stealthily to get to their destination sooner and use vehicles? That is my concern. What's going to be the monitoring to stop that sort of thing happening?
Helen, do you want to come back on that?
It's based on the residents, like any planning enforcement cases. So if there is evidence of a breach, then that gets reported to us. There's a live enforcement case, as I've said, regarding the effluent. We would look into that. So if you've got board members getting lots of phone calls, then we would look into that. There would be an evidence case built, and then the determination would be, you know, is there enough evidence here to be able to press it to a formal stage? So it's very much the same principle, whatever the breach, whether it's a condition or a building, the evidence base is we've relied on board members, local members to report that to us. But it's a robust condition to monitor, because there's a very strict time frame and there's a very strict number. So in terms of meeting the tests of the conditions, it's very clear, it's very precise, so it would be quite easy to demonstrate whether or not there's a breach. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a Wolves fan, when I saw VAR, you can imagine how I felt. But anyway, sorry to lighten the thing. I feel an hour for 2 vehicle movements is not it's far too much time. I just think that's sledgehammer to crack a nut, as they say. And it only takes 1 vehicle to reverse and beep, 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 that's it. So that affects the local amenity. I know, because where I live, we have a block making company. It's open all hours, and when the wind's in the wrong direction, I can forget. I'm woken up even earlier than my dog wakes me up. So I think that's unreasonable to expect to be granted an additional hour just for 2 vehicle movements. I'll turn it round to that. And is the existing permission for any activity to start not before 7? Or could they be in the yard from 6 o'clock reversing these vehicles or not? Could you just clarify that one, please?
Yeah, sorry, through you, Chair. Yeah, the restriction is vehicles entering and exiting the site. So it's for the purposes of being able to leave the site to take the larger vehicles. So they would be turning up in their own cars, because it's the start of a shift, so to speak, turning up in their own vehicles and then taking the larger vehicles off the site and then back again. So there would be no activity per se, other than the transfer of a person into a vehicle and then moving out the site.
So obviously there's other vehicles, other cars just moving around because it's a, lots of people, they might be getting up early to go to work, whatever, but it's not the same as an HGV reversing. As like I say, I think granting the hour is inappropriate.
Thank you, Councillor Steele. Councillor Sutton?
Can I just clarify something in relation to HGVs? From the point of view, VOSA require the driver to do a 10-minute walk around first thing in the morning before they start their journey. That means putting the tachograph in, putting the engine on, leave the engine running, i.e. to build up the air pressure for your brakes, and then do your walk around, which is a tick box criteria, including checking your tyres. If it's less than 10 minutes on your tacho, you will get automatically fined £100. So for the first 10 minutes of the shift of a lorry driver, you will turn the engine on and do your 10-minute walk around. And the engine will be running for 10 minutes before you start to reverse. Just a slight clarity.
Thank you for those observations, Councillor Sutton. Helen?
I don't think this is HGVs as such, as in like large, heavy articulated vehicles. This is the kind of effluent tanker style.
Well, the Chair, HGV start from class 3, class 2, class ones, which wagon and drag. They are all sections of HGVs, and they go from anything from 7.5 tonne all the way up to 44 tonne.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. But Helen, I think that's pros in our place, isn't it? Okay, thank you, Councillor Sutton, and thank you, Councillor Kelly, for clarifying those issues there. Any other member want to make any comments or observations, ask any questions? Okay, so I propose that we move to vote, and I'm going to ask for those to approve the application. To approve the application, please signify. To refuse the application.
You need to intervene here. Before you refuse the application, Chair, members do need to give me a planning reason for refusing the application, and I need to reiterate the point that I made earlier on, and that is that the concerns that members have raised in relation to noise are not supported by technical evidence, i.e. your environmental health officer has actually indicated there is no concern in terms of noise and amenity. And noting those points, I do actually want to invite members to give me a sound planning reason for refusal so that there is no application, for costs on appeal.
Okay, members, I think, sorry, Councillor Steele, you're going to come in.
I think it's EQ9, local effect on a local amenity.
It's detrimental to local amenity.
I haven't got the policies written out.
I think that's what the members are saying is the noise detrimental to local amenity.
Can I say also that it's the personal opinion of an officer who doesn't live there to say there's no noise, there won't be any noise. I find that, I know it's in the report, but personally I find that a bit annoying.
Yeah, can I just say that your committee relies upon the professional expertise of professional officers only because when the matter goes to appeal, the technical evidence is not going to be provided by members of the planning committee. An inspector will not give weight to issues around concern, etc., from lay individuals. He will give weight, he or she will give weight to professional, to the professional officers. And at this juncture, Chair, through yourself, I do want to make reference to a recent planning decision, which you had before the committee during the last committee, where there was an application for costs, and the costs that have actually come through in relation to the refusal based very on similar noise issues is 30,000, which we are actually working on. So I have no issue in members actually refusing this particular application, because you are the democratic committee who makes the planning decisions. All I'm actually saying is be mindful that you have no technical evidence before you, and be mindful I need a sound planning reason which can be supported on appeal.
Councillor Still.
So are you saying that EQ9, loss of local amenity, is not a strong enough case? Because if so, why are we even debating it?
Okay, so that's the consideration that they're quoting. Do you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, the policy is obviously sound, and the policy is clear that residential amenity needs to be looked at. But residential amenity can mean a lot of different things. It can be around noise, it can be about disturbance, it can be about odour, it can be about a lot of things. Residential amenity can be overbearing impact from a house extension or from a neighbouring dwelling. If you're going to use that policy as your policy hook, as we call it, to refuse, that's fine because the wording is there. But then that evidence as to what element of amenity is it? So if in this case you're talking about noise, then we need to be able to demonstrate that noise is going to be a problem and it meets that bar. The difficulty I think that PODIP's trying to get across is when the technical expert, which is environmental health team, are saying actually because of it only being 2 vehicles, we don't think that bar has been met. How do we evidence that, I guess? And that's why the report is shaped the way that it is and recommending approval, because we don't feel that we've got that evidence to be able to defend that position. But the policy is sound, Councillor Steele, is my point, but it's how it's interpreted in terms of that amenity. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Just Chairman of the committee, I'm faced with a committee here that are unanimously, every member is voting to refuse that application. And I'm going to proceed with that. So I'm going to ask members to, if you're minded to refuse the application, please signify. Yeah, it's detrimental to local amenities, yeah, the noise. Councillor Kelly.
Yeah, you're saying noise. Just to go back, amenity can mean a lot of things. So I think it needs to be a little bit clearer than.
Chair.
Yeah.
Councillor Kelly. Councillor Kelly first.
Yeah, on EQ9, I would
Okay.
say you've got from a HGV perspective, noise, lights coming out of the depot at that sort early in the morning. It's going to be dark. Noise sound travels quite as much more. There's your sort of elements that would come into the category of EQ9, for an example.
Councillor Kelly. Councillor Steele, I think you wanted to make a contribution. Okay, members, I'm going to put it back to you. To those voting against the application, as to refuse the application, members, please signify. Any abstentions? Okay, so we're okay with that. We had nobody voting for the application. We had, yeah, you got the numbers correct there. You might not be happy with the reasons, but we've got the numbers correct, yeah. Okay, members, thank you for that lively debate. That application has been refused.